7 of the rarest engines in the world. 7 of the rarest engines in the world, and the truth behind their silence will shock you. But what makes an engine so rare, it becomes a legend? Is it displacement? Power? Or was it simply too dangerous to be unleashed on the streets? Some were banned, others were buried, and a few were so ahead of their time, they were shut down by their own creators. These weren't just engines they were feared. They are mysteries on 4 wheels, hidden behind corporate curtains, from cover-ups to experimental monsters locked away in GM dyno labs. If you grew up around carburetors, chrome, and those cold start roars on a Saturday morning, this list is gonna bring back memories and maybe even a few chills. Ever heard of the 1969 Chevrolet ZL1 427 V8? That was a factory-built race motor that straight up threatened GM's own Corvette legacy. Or how about the 1970-72 Pontiac 455 HO, a torque king that vanished right when muscle was hitting its peak? Which engine in this list blew your mind? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and follow Muscle Car Masters for more forbidden horsepower and untold stories from the golden age of American muscle. (1969) ZL1 427 V8. There's rare, and then there's why did GM only make 69 of them? Rare. The 1969 ZL1 427 V8 wasn't just an engine, it was an elite-level corporate experiment, buried under layers of red tape, racing loopholes, and whispered conversations between engineers and speed shop owners. On the surface, it was a special-order powerhouse, available through GM's COPO 9560 system, a backdoor created for NHRA drag racers. But underneath, this engine was born for war. With its roots in Can-Am racing, the ZL1 wasn't just aluminum for bragging rights. It was light, brutal, and mechanically exotic, fitted with forged internals, high flow heads, and a transistorized ignition system that made it unlike any other big block GM ever sold to the public. Rated officially around 430 horsepower, insiders and dyno records tell a different story, well over 500 horsepower in stock trim, with the right fuel and tuning. It was so strong, many racers claimed it could outpull hemisphere heads and even 427 SOHC cameras, despite GM never officially promoting it. Why the secrecy? That's where the mystery deepens. Only 69 ZL1 Camaros were ever built. Some say it was due to the astronomical $4,160 upcharge, nearly as much as the base car itself. But others suspect GM executives quietly throttled the program after internal tests showed the ZL1 could embarrass Corvette's L88 and potentially disrupt corporate sales structure. Dealers like Fred Gibb fought to keep the engine alive, but his efforts were quietly sidelined. And here's the kicker: rumors still swirl about a handful of ghost ZL1s built for a special GM-backed racing team that never officially existed. No VINs, no records, just second-hand stories from retired track rats, and an oddball ZL1 block that surfaced in a Kansas junkyard. What happened to the rest? And why did GM work so hard to forget their most extreme engine ever? The answers are still hiding in plain sight. (1970-72) Pontiac 455 HO. In the twilight of Detroit's muscle car era, Pontiac gave the world one last roar, one last, unapologetic punch to the face of emissions and insurance regulations. They called it the 455 HO, And it was far more than just a big cube V8. This was the final true muscle engine from a brand that had defined performance in the 60s. With up to 370 horsepower and a jaw-dropping 500 pound-feet of torque, this beast could launch a 4,000-pound GTO or Grand Prix like a lightweight dragster. Under the hood, ram air manifolds, round port heads, a performance-tuned quadrajet, and a 4-bolt main block built to take punishment. It wasn't just strong, it was engineered for battle. But what makes this engine truly rare isn't just its power, it's what happened next. As early as 1973, the walls started closing in. Insurance premiums skyrocketed, the EPA tightened its grip, and Pontiac, like the rest of GM, began neutering its performance legends. By 1975, the once mighty 455 HO was renamed simply 455 and castrated to a pathetic 200 horsepower. It was a slow corporate kill. But here's the mystery. Only a handful of unmodified 1970 to 72 HO engines are believed to exist today. Many were stripped for race duty, modified by weekend warriors, or crushed under the weight of early emissions controls. And some were allegedly fitted with dealer-installed Stage 2 upgrades kits that Pontiac never officially acknowledged in public. Whispers from inside old Pontiac engineering circles talk about experimental cam profiles, secret dyno sessions, and even a plan to slip the HO into a limited run of Trans Ams built solely for SCCA homologation, but corporate said no. Where are those cars now? No records, no trail, just stories passed around swap meets and garages. (1959 to 1966) Buick 401 Nailhead. Before HEMI ruled the streets and LS swaps flooded the garages, there was a motor that didn't care about redlines or RPM bragging rights. The Buick 401 Nailhead, produced from 1959 to 1966, was a mechanical contradiction. An engine with tiny intake ports, vertically aligned valves, and a conservative cam profile yet capable of a brutal 425 pound-feet of torque, right off idle. It was raw. It was relentless. And it was unlike anything GM had ever built. No wonder they quietly buried it. Nicknamed the Nailhead because of its small, nail-like valve stems, this engine wasn't about flashy numbers, it was about real-world grunt. It powered big Buicks like the Electra 225 and the Riviera, but its true calling came when hot rodders and drag racers got their hands on it. Tommy Ivo famously stuffed 4 of them into a dragster. And the 1965 Skylark Grand Sport? Buick labeled it 400 for marketing purposes, but every gearhead knew the truth. It was a 401 Nailhead under the hood, pushing torque like a diesel. But here's where the story takes a darker turn. Despite its reputation for reliability, torque, and unique design, GM pulled the plug on the Nailhead just as the muscle car wars exploded. Why? Some say it was outdated. Others believe Buick's engineering department was already developing something more modern. But a deeper look into internal memos from the period now part of private collections suggests something else. Buick may have been forced to step aside in the corporate power play between Pontiac, Chevrolet, and Oldsmobile. After all, the Nailhead's cast-iron simplicity and low RPM punch made it a threat in a world where high-revving horsepower sold headlines. Today, clean 401. Nailheads are rare finds. Most were pulled, swapped, or forgotten in favor of trendier small blocks. But for those who remember the feel of torque twisting the frame at a stoplight, the Nailhead remains a lost legend, an engine that didn't scream. It growled. And that sound? It still haunts the garages of men who know the difference between RPM and raw muscle. 1967 to 1972, GMC 637, cubic inch 60-degree V8. While gearheads argue over hemisphere heads and big block Chevys, few have even heard of GM's largest gas-powered V8 ever built for on-road use, and fewer still have seen one in the wild. The GMC 637 cubic inch V8, built from 1967 to 1972, was never meant for showroom glory. No muscle cars, no SS badges, no performance ads in Hot Rod magazine. This engine was a whispered legend, tucked under the hoods of GMC's heaviest trucks, where torque not hype did the talking. Rated at a modest 275 horsepower, the 637's real magic was in its brute force 600 pound-feet of torque at just 1,600 RPM. It was based on GMC's massive 478 cubic inch V6, essentially adding 2 cylinders and creating a rare 60-degree V8, an engineering oddity in a world where 90-degree V8s were the norm. Its bore was a wild 5.125 inches with a short 3.86-inch stroke, favoring durability and torque delivery over high revving performance. But the strangest part? The spark plugs weren't where you'd expect. GMC engineers buried them deep inside the V of the engine, protecting the wires from glowing exhaust manifolds during long hauls at near full throttle. It replaced another monstrous anomaly, the 702 cubic inch twin-six V12. And though smaller, the 637 was lighter, more compact, and nearly as powerful. There was even a diesel version dubbed the Toro Flow, and a rare twin-turbo variant that made over 460 pound-feet of torque. But here's the kicker. It never made it into passenger cars, and most records of the engine faded as GMC truck branding merged deeper into Chevy's identity. Why didn't GM repurpose it for performance use? Why isn't this beast showcased in GM's engine legacy halls? Some say it was just too industrial. Others suggest the cost and complexity didn't align with GM's shifting priorities. But to those who know, the 637 isn't just an engine, it's a lost chapter. A hidden titan that roared behind the scenes while muscle cars stole the spotlight. (1964 to 65). Ford 427 SOHC Cammer. If there was ever an engine Detroit was afraid of, it was this one. Born from corporate desperation and engineered for outright domination, the Ford 427 SOHC Cammer was never supposed to end up in the hands of regular folks, and NASCAR made sure it didn't. Built in response to Chrysler's devastating 426 HEMI victory at the 1964 Daytona 500, the Cammer was Ford's not-so-subtle way of saying, "We can beat the elephant, and we'll do it with science." Using the proven FE side oiler block as a base, Ford added single overhead cams, hemispherical combustion chambers, and shaft-mounted roller rockers, all cutting-edge for the time. The result? A factory rating of 657 horsepower at 7,500 RPM in dual-carb form. But insiders claimed that was conservative. With tuning, these monsters could easily push 700-plus horsepower without nitrous, turbos, or gimmicks. Yet it had one Achilles' heel. A 6-foot timing chain, a marvel of mechanical ambition that became a weak point under prolonged abuse. But it never got to prove itself on the NASCAR circuit. Bill France banned the Cammer in 1965, citing its overhead cam design as too exotic for stock car racing. Translation? Too fast, too advanced, and too dangerous to the HEMI-dominated status quo. What followed was a quiet purge factory. Racing support evaporated, and the Cammer was relegated to a limited release through dealers, with just about 500 units ever made. Still, it wasn't the end. The Cammer found a second life in the outlaw world of drag racing, where it became a staple of funny cars, top fuel dragsters, and the wildest builds of the 60s and 70s. Connie Kalita, Pete Robinson, and others pushed these engines to their limits and beyond. Today, the 427 SOHC is more than rare, it's forbidden fruit, a mechanical middle finger to the racing establishment, and a piece of Ford's rebellious legacy that never got the spotlight it deserved. 1970 to 1976, Cadillac 500 cubic inch V8. Back when Cadillac meant more than chrome, land yachts, and vinyl roofs. Back when owning one was the mark of a man who had made it, Cadillac dropped a bombshell under the hood, the 500 cubic inch V8. Introduced in 1970, it was the largest production gasoline V8 ever put into a passenger car, and it didn't arrive quietly. With 400 horsepower and a pavement twisting, 550 pound-feet of torque, this engine turned luxury into lethal performance. It was built not for racers, but for powerful people who wanted to dominate the road in total silence. With 400 horsepower and a pavement-twisting 550 pound-feet of torque, this engine turned luxury into lethal performance. It was built not for racers, but for powerful people who wanted to dominate the road in total silence. Initially exclusive to the Eldorado, the 500 cubic inch monster gave the front-wheel drive Caddy a level of torque that made it feel more like a locomotive than a car. And yet, it wasn't rough or loud, it was smooth, controlled, effortless. But as the 70s unfolded, emissions regulations and fuel crises tightened their grip. By 1976, the once mighty 500 was choked down to just 190 horsepower, a shadow of its former self. Cadillac tried to fight back with Bendix electronic fuel injection, one of the earliest EFI systems on the market, but it was too little, too late. The horsepower war was over, quietly. So why is the 500 cubic inch engine rare today? Because the ones that remain in original high-output form are few and far between. Most were overlooked, modified, or left to rot, mistaken for just another emissions-era engine. But those who know, they know. They remember the feeling of that deep torque wave when the throttle opened up, and they remember the stories, rumors of test mules making over 500 horsepower, of Cadillac engineers secretly tuning the 500 for 0 to 60 times under 6 seconds. What happened to those engines? Were they destroyed? Hidden? Or worse, repurposed under different names, hidden in plain sight? Whatever the truth, the Cadillac 500 remains an enigma, a monument to a lost era when America briefly flirted with merging brute power and executive class. (1963 to 1990) Chevrolet 292 Inline 6. While GM's flashy small blocks and big blocks stole the spotlight, there was one engine they quietly tucked away, a mechanical sleeper that never got the recognition it deserved. The Chevrolet 292. Inline 6, built from 1963 to 1990, wasn't just a truck engine, it was a threat. A threat to GM's marketing machine, to the corporate V8 dominance, and to the delicate balance of Detroit's performance hierarchy. On paper, it was a low-key workhorse, but behind the scenes, it was an overbuilt anomaly that many believe was intentionally suppressed. Let's break it down. 7 main bearings, a forged steel crankshaft, massive bore and stroke, 3.875 by 4.1, 25 inches, and a block so thick it looked like it came from a diesel plant. GM rated it at just 165 horsepower and 260 pound-feet of torque, but independent dyno tests and whispered track stories suggested a whole lot more. Retired engineers admitted the 292 was detuned from the factory, with restrictive cams, exhausts, and intake manifolds to keep it from cannibalizing V8 sales. Why promote a 6 when you're trying to push the 350? And yet, in the shadows, the 292 found its people. Underground racers began building turbocharged versions, pushing 450-plus horsepower on stock bottom ends. It became a cult icon among straight-six purists. Then came the whispers of something deeper, a mysterious test fleet of ES6 trucks built by GM in the early 70s. These allegedly featured high-output 292s for commercial evaluation, with no official documentation, and strange VIN coding known only to a handful of collectors today. Some say GM planned to launch a performance variant, even considering a fuel-injected version for the Camaro, codenamed Typhoon 6. But it vanished killed in committee, erased from brochures, buried in parts bins, and all we're left with is a handful of pristine blocks, a secretive collector community, and a reputation that refuses to die. The 292 wasn't just underrated, it was outlawed within its own brand. And the men who keep them alive today? They're not just gearheads. They're keepers of a secret GM tried to bury. What if these 7 engines weren't just rare, but deliberately forgotten? Engines like the ZL1427, the Pontiac 455 HO, and GMC's monstrous 637 cubic-inch V8. These weren't accidents. They were threats to the corporate narrative. Machines that made too much noise in the boardrooms, not just on the track. Some were banned, others were buried. But the real question is, how many more are still out there? Hidden away in barns, old dyno test cells, or mislabeled parts crates, waiting to be rediscovered by the few who really know where to look. Maybe you've seen one. Maybe you've heard the rumble of a legend that never made the brochure. So tell us in the comments, which engine do you think the automakers tried to erase from history, and why? Don't forget to like, share, and follow Muscle Car Masters for more forgotten firepower, lost legends, and the secrets they never wanted you to know. Because here, we don't just remember muscle, we revive it.